Why have we all stopped having kids? That's the question. Let's find out.
Hey, 42 here. There's a serious problem facing our future. And unlike wars and climate change, it doesn't really get talked about. You won't find hordes of students waving banners in city centres for this cause, but it's arguably more of a
In fact, I think many younger people, it's not long ago before people thought having kids was bad for the planet.
threat to our future than either of these. We've stopped having babies.
Guys, why are you not having sex? Or maybe you are, but you don't want to have kids?
It started off slowly, but has begun to accelerate at a frightening rate. And if we're not careful, it could be our downfall.
Damn.
Well, hold on a minute. The global population is still increasing, you might think, and you'd be right. It currently stands at 8.2 billion, and we're well on.
How many Indians? 1.5. Isn't that crazy?
Trend to reach the big 10 bill by 2050. But just take a look at this map, and you'll see a different story unfolding. This is a map of global fertility rates by country. That's basically how many babies the average woman has during her lifetime. In 1950, populations were booming. In the USA back then, women were averaging 3 babies each, 3.5 in Canada, and just over 2 in the UK. In Iraq, they were quite literally banging them out, with 8 babies each. And that was the average. But as we fast forward through the latter half of the 20th century, the birth rate has plummeted precipitously, especially in developed nations. Then, as we reached the 2000s, it truly fell off a cliff edge. In fact, it appears that only sub-Saharan Africa is still doing God's work.
This is the crazy point, right? What is it that's stopping us from having all these? Man, I'm stopping too much. Huh? It's only been 1 minute and 33 seconds. I'm gonna let you watch a bit longer.
As of writing this video, the birth rate in the US has fallen to 1.6. And in the UK and Australia, it's a measly 1.5. Other European countries are putting on an even worse show. Portugal, Greece and Finland are 1.4, and Italy and Spain are right at the bottom of the pack at 1.3. Last year, Italy's government declared a national emergency after it recorded just 400,000 births in that year. Let me ask you, have you noticed this trend yourself? You probably have.
Yes.
You may have noticed that 20 and 30-somethings these days would much rather get a dog instead of a baby. In fact, a couple of years ago, Pope Francis addressed his flock on the balcony of the Vatican, as he does every week, and he said something which made headlines around the world and got a few people a bit angry. Today, we see a form of selfishness. We see that some people do not want to have a child. Sometimes they have one and that's it, but they have dogs and cats that take the place of children. This may make people laugh, but it is a reality. This practice is a denial of fatherhood and motherhood and diminishes us, takes away our humanity. Now, before we continue, let's get one thing out of the way. I'm not here to cast judgment. I'm not the Pope, and I'm not your dad. But you can't deny that there's something big happening here. And as someone who is really interested in societal trends, I want to get to the bottom of this matter and find out why and what happens next. Because you have to admit, it is a bit odd. It flies in the face of biology. Humans are driven by sex. It's in our blood. It's in our evolution. It is evolution.
Sex is one thing, right? Having a kid is a complete other. Although, yeah, it must come down to a form of hope too. The only reason people have kids is because they believe there's a future to humanity. And if the future looks so dim that having kids feels like you're making it worse, well, you would go against that natural inclination, no?
Think about sex whilst eating cereal, whilst we're at work, and when shopping for mangoes.
Yeah.
Yet, when it comes to making babies, we're bloody hopeless. At least that's the case in 2024.
At least,
as we've established,
but Africa.
It wasn't always this way. Now, you might think it simply doesn't matter. So what if we're not having as many children as our parents did? Isn't the world overcrowded anyway? Well, in some ways, yes. but also kind of not.
Exactly.
And by the end of this video, we'll discover why declining birth rates could be the biggest threat to our future that we face today. That sounds dramatic, but bear with me because this issue really does affect pretty much everything, both now and in the future. Today's video
I mean, look, he's not wrong, right? Of course it affects everything. Let's watch this ad to give this guy some credit.
is in paid partnership with BetterHelp. Right now, as we go into January, some of you might be feeling a little down or lonely, like you have no one to talk to.
That's why we're
But
not
that's
having
just
kids.
not true. BetterHelp offers a safe space to talk, where you can share what's on your mind, whether it's stress, sadness, or relationship issues, without fear or judgment.
Get
BetterHelp
help.
connects you with a
But better.
credentialed therapist who is trained to listen and give you helpful, unbiased advice. They can provide insights and teach techniques to manage emotions, reduce stress, and make positive changes in your life. Starting therapy is easy with BetterHelp. Just fill out a questionnaire and you'll be matched with a therapist in as little as a couple of days.
Too easy,
and one of
man.
the best features of BetterHelp is that if the first therapist doesn't feel like quite the right fit, you can easily switch to another until you find someone who you connect with. They carefully
It's the
make
same
sure
person.
the therapists on the platform are well qualified and their customer support team is there to help you if you have any questions. So if you're struggling and you think you'd benefit from a therapy session, click the link in the description or go to betterhelp.com/42 and get 10% off your first month of therapy.
Consider if someone makes a company called Best Help, this place is going bankrupt.
But first, let's talk about what went wrong. And to crack that chestnut, we need to go back to a little time called the 50s, when everyone, in developed nations at least, was making money, building their future, and having a hell of a lot of babies. The
Heck yeah.
1950s was the golden age of the nuclear family, as well as white picket fences, futuristic-looking cars, and Don Draper-esque advertisements, mostly trying to sell refrigerators to housewives.
Look at look at, this is how a new 1943 Norge would look in your kitchen. Heck yeah, I want that in my kitchen. Does it come with the dude too, the soldier?
In the morning dew that followed the Second
That's
World
crazy.
War, the American economy was booming.
President Truman announced the official surrender.
This is
What
a
these ads,
solemn
man.
but glorious hour.
Soldiers returned home to a nation eager to rebuild and grow. The GI Bill was introduced in 1944 to pay for college for veterans. This provided unprecedented access to education. It also helped with housing loans, making home ownership and, by extension, starting a family more attainable than ever before. Society championed traditional family values, and there was a collective optimism about the future. Women were encouraged, if not expected, to embrace homemaking and motherhood. Magazines, television shows, and advertisements all glorified the role of the dedicated housewife.
Women of the family don't shirk their cleaning tasks either.
Large families were not just commonplace, they were the norm. Having 3, 4, or even more children was seen as a blessing. It was almost a patriotic duty to help populate and strengthen this prosperous, burgeoning nation. Now, I'm using the USA as the obvious example here, but the same trend, more or less, followed suit in the following decades around most of Europe and other parts of the developed world. Then, the 60s hit. And so began the era of sex, drugs, rock and roll, and fornicating hippies. For the first time, the birth control pill was made commercially available in America in 1960 and 1961
That's the
over
reason.
in Britain. And thus began the age of hedonism. People could finally have sex at a whim without the burden of a bundle of babies following soon after. This coincided with the women's liberation movement, where women campaigned for their right to work and for equal pay, which has only gained steam ever since. In the UK, in 1914, only 23% of working-age women were in employment. By 1970, it had jumped to just over 50%, and today, it stands at
Tax the entire nation, including women. That's the idea, right? Tax everyone. It's more money for the government.
72%. The unrelenting toll of the 9-to-5 tore apart traditional family structures. More and more women chose to delay or forgo motherhood altogether in order to further their careers. Throughout the 60s and into the 70s, birth rates in all developed nations continued their death spiral.
This
If
graph
anyone
is
thought the
crazy.
decline would plateau at some point, they were wrong. The decline continues, even today.
Look
And
how early,
I think
early Europe is. I don't know what year that is. It doesn't say, but look how early Europe fell below the replacement rate. Well, Europe and what are we looking at? Is it Latin America, Southeast Asia? I don't know which one it is. Oh, Southeast Asia. Yeah, I mean,
they were wrong. The decline continues, even today. And I think I have a pretty good idea why, which I'll get to at the end of the
That's
video.
what I wanna
But
know.
First, why should we care? Is this not just an innocuous trend that we should roll over and accept? Well, we could, but we may do so at our peril, because some experts think declining birth rates is one of the greatest challenges we face as a species. But rather than just firing off a list of reasons why it's so bad, I want to show you. And to do that, we're going to need to head to the place where birth rates are at their lowest ever in recorded human history.
let's find it.
South Korea. Earlier,
Yes.
I said that the current birth rate in the United Kingdom is 1.5.
Dude,
That's pretty bloody awful, especially considering that the replacement birth rate is 2.1, and that's without any growth. Yes, that means that the UK, at 1.5, now has a declining native population, as does pretty much every other developed nation on Earth right now. But what if I told you that South Korea's population isn't just declining, it's travelling at terminal velocity into the abyss? Because their fertility rate isn't just half of most Western countries. No, it's far worse than that. As of 2024, it has fallen to 0.67. That's right, Koreans have figured out how to give birth to 67% of a human. Jokes aside, if
it's so low. It is so low. That is crazy. How many, he'll probably explain it, but how many generations until it's just, the thing is, are people adaptable enough over time? If it's shrinking too fast, do we then change to then suddenly have kids?
If we look a little closer, South Korea's reproductive woes go a long way to revealing the dystopian future that lies ahead for the rest of the developed world. And the first place we need to look, to quote an old American political slogan, is the economy, stupid. Korea's population is rapidly aging. In the 70s, the average age in South Korea was in the 20s. Today, it's 45.
The thing about the economy is that when you're doing, if you can work a normal job, have enough time to have a wife and at least 2 kids or whatever, the economy, if it's doing well, will pay for the time needed to take care of these things. And that's really the issue. At the moment, people are struggling to get by in most developed worlds or countries. And if you just simply don't feel like you have the time, you don't have the money, you can't make it, the sense of hopelessness makes you as a person go down the dark abyss of mental health as well. And you start thinking, well, if I can't have kids, if I can't further the race, which is just biologically natural to us, what's the point of being here? What's our purpose? And people will have many answers for that, right? Oh, you're just here to exist. And it's like, well, humanity, like any other animal, is supposed to procreate to further their race, to further their species. And that's just not happening right now, which is, it should be known as one of the biggest issues, in my opinion. But unless we recognize the problems creating this and fix those, it's just never gonna, I don't see how it's gonna change. There'll be a way, maybe, but.
By 2050, it's projected that roughly 50% of the population will be aged over 65.
That's the thing, right? Who's gonna take care of all these people at the older age? It's just, I think the best, if you go to a place, right, you're figuring out where you want to live in the world or whatever, you go to a place where they have a really good balance between young, middle-aged, and old, and everything in between, that's a really good thing, because it shows a strong society or community, at least in that area.
which will officially make it the world's most elderly country.
Crazy.
With fewer young people entering the workforce, there's a labour shortage impacting various sectors. For instance, the manufacturing industry, which has been a backbone of South Korea's economic miracle, is already struggling to find skilled workers, and the problem is only going to compound in the coming years. South Korea does have a rather unusual economy. It's dominated by a few giant mega corporations. Samsung comprises a mind-blowing 22% of the country's gross domestic product.
That's also the issue. I've heard with Samsung, at least this is very limited information I have, the people who work there, sometimes they're working completely over hours, working for, in some cases, low pay, and that's another, like, why would anyone there, as you call it, salarymen or whatever, would even consider having kids?
And Hyundai makes up 11%. But in recent years, both these companies have reported issues in sourcing skilled young workers, as the pool of talented youth shrinks year on year. A lot of the challenges facing South Korea are mirrored in their neighbour, Japan. Japan has always, rather famously, maintained a strict low immigration policy. However, the country, like South Korea, is now facing a rapidly ageing population crisis. The Japanese government previously tried to pay people to have babies, but it didn't work. So now they have started, for the first time in modern history, importing millions of low-skilled foreign immigrants to plug their rapidly growing.
I genuinely think it's a terrible idea. It's basically patchwork, right? So that's how they're approaching it. Instead of making the country's natives want to have kids, they're just throwing in people that don't know the culture, they haven't grown up there, they don't know the standards, and you can do that in small amounts so that they can assimilate. But when you do it in large amounts, a lot of countries are seeing this issue, the same with the US and a lot of European countries, where it just doesn't work. It becomes chaotic for a long time. And getting rid of all the people you got in, it's just not an easy task. Some of them have visas, some of them are legally there, maybe never committed a crime, but it's like it's not even law things. It's like just not knowing how to speak to each other is a big thing. I've seen it. I'm European and now I live in the US and I've lived in New Zealand. It's the same in many places, all those three.
Growing population whole. But it's not just economic output that an aging population threatens. Arguably, the bigger issue is expenditure. South Korea's social welfare system is under immense pressure, as the ratio of contributors to beneficiaries is shrinking. It's now common practice for South Koreans to delay retirement and work longer into old age. South Korea is dominated by one mega city, Seoul. The Greater Seoul urban area has a population of 26 million. That's literally 50% of the entire country. Everyone wants to move to and work in Seoul.
That's the same problem in Italy, right? In Italy, a lot of the smaller towns are becoming dilapidated and young individuals are just not sticking around. They're going to bigger cities like Milano. And you question, why is it that a small economy can't function in its own? What is it that's making a town not be able to care for itself? And you could bring up taxes in a form of bureaucracy or whatever. I don't know. It's terrible though, because those smaller areas provide a lot on their own.
As you travel a stunning Korean countryside, you'll notice a demoralizing trend.
Yeah.
Empty, abandoned towns and villages everywhere. Take Gokseong County at the very southern tip of Korea. Once a thriving agricultural hub, its population has dwindled dramatically. Schools are shutting down due to a lack of students. Some schools that were built for hundreds are now operating with just a dozen pupils. The Ministry of Education reported that over 3,800 schools have closed nationwide since 1982 because there simply aren't enough children to fill them. Rural families have stopped having babies, and local businesses can't stay afloat without a young, vibrant population to support them. Family-run restaurants, convenience stores, and service providers are shutting their doors.
Yeah, that's with small businesses, when they all shut like this, those are the type of things which could keep generations going. If generations, they kept with each other and the community was strong in that case, and someone had their own business, it's much harder to fail. because you're all helping each other. And now we're all traveling around the world looking for places to live, or because it's too hard where we are. It's a damning situation.
Leading to economic stagnation and ultimately ghost towns. It's estimated that 118 cities and towns across South Korea are currently at risk of vanishing altogether. This has a knock-on effect in Seoul too. Because there are no opportunities outside of the city, the youth of South Korea have no choice but to move there when they reach working age, pushing up
rental more competition, lower wages,
prices, and the general cost of living in the city. Both men and women have to work longer, harder hours than ever before to pay their exorbitant rents for their tiny apartments, which means, you guessed it, no time or financial means, or space for that matter, to start a family. They are now trapped in a vicious cycle. Only 10 years ago, South Korea had the longest working hours of any developed country. In 2013, the average employee worked 2,070 hours per year, compared to 1,700 in the USA.
That's crazy, because people don't understand your wage is based on, well, yearly, annually, monthly, whatever. But when you work more hours that you don't get paid for, your wage decreases significantly. People don't get this. They think, oh, I'm just working, I got the time. No. Well, that's probably not what they're thinking. They probably hate it, but you know.
And although this has been reduced in recent years, there's bound to be a lasting effect on the population. This left almost zero time for personal life, causing many to postpone or abandon.
I'm sorry, I'm pausing all the time. This is an important thing here. The fact that it has dropped since what it looks like 2013 to 2023, I feel like a lot of people, and I could be very wrong for this, are just, they're tired. They just don't want to anymore. And even if they have a lesser quality of life or whatever, they'd rather work less hours at this point and have some form of a life. And when climbing the ladder seems so impossible and with little reward compared to the effort needed, this is what I mean with humanity being so adaptable. They just stop. Some things they just stop, like it's intuitive. It's not working, I'm just gonna stop. And then when one person does it, the next, and it all becomes the norm to just not give a shit anymore.
This left almost zero time for personal life, causing many to postpone or abandon plans for marriage or parenthood. And the results are telling. A brutal work culture and a decline in traditional family values has sent suicide rates skywards. Today, South Korea is ranked number 4 in the world for the highest per capita, just behind Greenland.
Holy shit, Greenland? I didn't know Greenland was so high.
Finland, Guyana, and Lithuania. There's even a term for young people who have given up on dating, marriage, and having children altogether. The Sampo generation. Some have extended this to the Enpo generation, indicating that they've given up on multiple life goals, including home ownership and personal relationships. A 2022 survey found that 65% of young women in South Korea don't want children.
Crazy.
The problem has grown so bad that the South Korean government has had to step in. They've poured over 280 trillion won, about 210 billion US dollars, into programs aimed at encouraging childbirth over the past decade and a half, including cash bonuses for new parents, as well as a monthly allowance for parents, extended parental leave, and housing incentives for families with multiple children. South Korean construction company.
It would be cool to know what South Koreans think about that. Because, I mean, it sounds good just looking at it now, right? And you think, hey, go for it. But we don't know if the numbers are low. We don't know if there's any South Koreans watching. What do you think about those incentives?
The Boo Young Group has even begun paying its workers the equivalent of £60,000 if they have a baby. Since the initiative started in 2021, they have already paid £4 million to their employees in congratulations, you had sex bounties.
Heck yeah.
And the big question is, are these highly unconventional solutions actually working? No. The fertility rate in South Korea in 2021 was 0.7, and it has continued to drop every single year, sitting at 0.67 today. South Korea is very similar to its neighbor, Japan, with a birth rate of 0.69. But that got me thinking, why is the birth rate so shockingly low in South Korea and Japan? Well, perhaps if we zoom out a bit, we can spot a trend in the data that reveals what's really going on here. And that trend is, in one word, development. Between 1950 and 1980, both South Korea and Japan flourished from the ashes of World War II and experienced economic miracles. In 1968, Japan actually became the world's second largest economy.
Japan is the world's largest manufacturer of motorcycles and bicycles.
So then, South Korea and Japan are two of the most developed countries in the world. They are also, arguably, two of the most orderly and civilized societies on the planet.
That's what I was going to say. Exactly. I think the more developed a nation becomes, the more rules, the more bureaucracy, the more you gotta play a game that's been set for you that you didn't necessarily create. If you're born into it, whatever. And that removes free will or freedom to move and to take your own decisions. And the worse the game is over time, the worse the rules, the more difficult it becomes to climb that social hierarchy, the less you want to play it and the less anyone wants to play it. That's it. That's how I see it. You agree?
In 1974, Karan Singh, a former minister in India's House of Parliament, famously said, "Development is the best contraceptive," and rarely has a truer prediction of the state of the future been made. This is a map of global fertility rates in 2024. Actually, I tell a lie. What you're actually looking at is a map of the Human Development Index, which considers various factors such as health, education, and income to objectively measure human development in each country. Watch what happened when I fade over the map of global fertility rates. What you probably noticed was, well, not a lot. Because the two maps are almost identical. The world's least developed nations have the most births, and vice versa. As mentioned, the fertility rate in the UK currently stands at 1.5, and in Japan it's 0.69. If Karan Singh's assertion holds true, that development is the best contraceptive, then that would mean Japan is 54% more developed than the United Kingdom.
I don't know about development between the two countries. I just know that the UK is in a shittier state than Japan in some sense of infrastructure, cleanliness, things like this in major cities. So maybe that plays a role too, because Japan is definitely a place with much more orderly rules, bureaucracy, higher than the UK, even though the UK is its own issue.
Now, I realise that's an extremely simplistic way to view things, and development is actually quite a difficult metric to measure. It's also somewhat subjective, but it can be argued that Japan is doing pretty well. They have the bullet train, whilst the UK has cancelled trains.
Exactly.
They have one of the world's healthiest populations, whilst the UK has a growing obesity crisis.
Thanks for answering.
And they have toilets that talk to you and squirt it to your arse crack. And if that doesn't scream development, I don't know what does.
Can't lie, he's right.
We know development decreases the prevalence of families, but the mystery that still...
I think it's in the hardship that we find community amongst ourselves. And in that community, you find people that you like and dislike. And within the people you like, you find someone you're going to have a kid with.
Confounds statisticians is why. And that's kind of why I made this video. If we can understand why it's happening, then perhaps we can work to reverse the trend before it's too late. I know, once again, I'm sounding rather alarmist, but remember, almost every developed country on Earth right now is well below the population replacement rate of 2.1. Our native populations are shrinking, and that means overstretched, crumbling economies and social support systems. And it's not all about money. Our cultural legacies that we should all be so proud of are also going to shrink and one day disappear into the history books. And when we look at the numbers, it's clear that we don't have long to fix the issue. If we exclude immigration from our calculations, the population of South Korea is expected to drop from 52 million to 38 million by 2070. Applying the same logic to the USA,
Longer than I thought, actually.
its current population is 346 million, but by 2070, it's projected to drop to 239 million.
Crazy.
Obviously, migration is a thing, so these numbers probably won't hold true, but it's an interesting thought experiment that highlights the scale of the issue. So then, returning to my previous question.
Yeah, but the thing about migration is it feels irrelevant if they're all coming from other places that also don't have kids. So I mean, the minus will come from somewhere, right? If you just put it all together, I don't know.
Why does
Africa can't supply the whole world with people, or like even just certain parts?
Development cause birth rates to plummet? Well, there are many factors that are working in tandem here. It's a very complex web. But after my research, I've been able to identify what seem to be the 4 most impactful reasons. And those are, quite simply,
All right, let's hear it.
diet, religion, economy, and individualism.
Interesting.
That first one might surprise you a little. You probably don't think that diet has any meaningful correlation to birth rates. But bear with me. Consider what is possibly the biggest shift in dietary trends as a nation becomes more developed.
Fast food.
People work longer, they have less time to cook, and hence they eat a lot more processed and fast foods. In the United States, the world's richest country, ultra-processed food makes up around 70% of the average diet. That probably doesn't surprise you,
hardcore.
but you might think that highly developed nations like South Korea and Japan hardly eat any processed food. In fact, don't they have 2 of the healthiest diets in the world? Well, kinda, yeah, but
A lot of 7-Eleven.
also no. Diets have changed a lot over the past 50 years. Even in countries like Japan, the older generations may still eat a balanced, healthy diet of whole foods, free from almost all processed ingredients. But the younger generation is embracing fast food faster than ever before in history. Japan and Italy have long been considered the gold standards for health and longevity. Both contain blue
Italy.
zones where people regularly live to over 100.
My parents are from Sardinia.
But in Italy, for example, the old ways of the Mediterranean diet with its fresh fish, whole grains, pulses, and
You should see the amount of olive oil I have at home.
olives is rapidly being replaced by McDonald's and ultra-processed convenience foods in the supermarkets. Don't get me wrong, these foods are still nowhere near as ubiquitous as they are in Britain, America, and elsewhere, but trends are changing. And crucially, this trend is happening most strongly with people in their
Yeah, this is the thing as well. If we become smaller families, how do you pass down this information? Please don't take my word for this, but as far as I heard, last year in Italy, I think 1 million youth had left the country to find work elsewhere. I might be wrong, but that's a lot. I don't know. I'm gonna take that back because I just heard it once. I don't know if it's true, but I know for sure a lot of people leave Italy to find opportunity elsewhere, for sure. I just don't know the number 100%.
20s and 30s who might be thinking about having children. And that's a big problem, because processed foods are laden with chemicals that wreak havoc on our reproductive systems. A study in 2014 found that men who regularly eat processed meat had a 23% lower sperm count, whereas men who eat high-quality unprocessed meat have a sperm count in the healthy range. Interestingly, men who regularly eat fresh fish have up to 65% higher sperm count. The situation is similar for women. Ultra-processed foods interfere with the endocrine system, leading to hormone imbalances and decreased fertility. Diets high in ultra-processed foods are also correlated with high inflammation, nutrient deficiencies, obesity, metabolic disorders, and diabetes.
Feels like every time we try to play with the natural creation of the planet, we just have bad outcomes.
All of which frustrate fertility by contributing to issues such as polycystic ovary syndrome in women and reduced sperm quality in men. But food is just one cog in the system. The way we live our lives and form our communities is seriously shaking the foundations of our populations. As countries become more developed, they often become less religious. For instance, in the UK, the 2021 census reveals that less than 50% of the population now identifies as Christian. That's the first time in history it's dropped below half. But this secularization trend is a global phenomenon. In Sweden, one of the most secular countries, only about 18% of people consider religion to be important. Now, you don't need me to tell you that pretty much all of the 10,000 world religions promote family values, encourage larger families, and sometimes discourage contraception and abortion.
I think there's also more than that. You feel like you're part of something larger than life itself. And so, if you're part of a religion that speaks highly of beyond the body to the soul and all that, there's a sense that you're living for something more than just all the hardship with going to work every day, same job, is for more than just a paycheck. I think that's incredibly important. It's the provider of hope and a lot of other things.
And whether you're happy about secularization or not, the fact is that fewer people than ever, in over 3,000 years of our history, are being raised within the framework of religion.
You're also taught basic things like morality and ethics through these religions sometimes. And if you don't have those, they don't really teach you that in school, right? You have a course on, or a class on morality.
Their moral and behavioral compass. For better or for worse, people feel more liberated to make their own choices about marriage and families, instead of dutifully delighting their deity by doing the deed.
Wow, great sense.
Then there's the economy. In fact, it could be argued that economic strain is the #1 reason for declining birth rates. Pew Research found that 36% of under 50s stated that they couldn't afford to raise a child as the reason for not wanting children. It's been estimated that if you were to raise a child to the age of 18 in 2024, it will cost you and your partner around £200,000 or $260,000. And that's not including university or college fees, which usually adds tens of thousands more. One of the biggest baby blockers has been...
If you were to look at a graph of who has that much money, it's going to be so few people, at least in the United States.
Wage stagnation. Until the 60s, fertility rates were generally increasing or remaining steady.
Brides fast 1 or 2 days before the wedding. Emerging from the ceremony, they appear worn out, as if vanquished in battle.
But the fall really began in earnest around 1970. And knowing that information, I was a bit shocked when I came across this chart. This maps average US wages versus productivity, basically the amount of hours people are working and their output. And just look what happened. In 1973, there was a sudden, marked...
They removed the gold standard from the dollar in 1971, and it was fully enacted in 1973. That's why this problem exists.
Divergence that broke the trend wide apart. To put it bluntly, we are working more than ever before in history, and companies are outputting more than ever before, but our relative compensation, that's this gap, is lower than ever before.
It's actually pretty great. There's a whole site for this. What happened in 71? As far as I know. Here, if you ever want to know, I'm going to put this in the description or wherever. There's a bunch of charts here. It's just... If you're interested, I'm going to put the link.
In the 1950s, a single income could comfortably support a family of 4. But today, forget it.
Yeah.
Today, we find mums and dads all over the world working their arses off, and they still struggle to put food on the table for their children. You look at stats like this, and is it any bloody wonder that young people are opting not to have children? Inflation is rising, costs are rising, but wages are just not keeping up.
Yeah.
In fact, since the financial crisis of 2008, wages have completely flatlined in most countries. Just look at this chart from the BBC, comparing inflation in the UK to weekly wages.
That's insanity.
Soon we might find ourselves in a dystopia where only the rich can afford to have children, or maybe we're already there. And the cherry on top is that house prices are less affordable than ever before. The house price to earnings ratio is currently around 5 in the USA, and in the UK, it's an absolutely shocking 8.3, meaning the average house in the UK is over 8 times the average annual wage of an individual. Sure, mortgages exist, but interest rates have absolutely skyrocketed over the past few years, so all this means that saving up to obtain a mortgage is now almost inconceivable because with house prices so high, the deposit required is astronomical.
People also don't understand when you have a percentage increase in something like a mortgage rate and the price of the home is increasing, that exponential increase is also in itself much larger than it would be if you increased the mortgage rate from 6 to 8% if the home costed $40,000 versus if it cost $400,000.
If you do somehow manage it, your monthly mortgage payments will eat away at almost all of your income for the next 25 years, which doesn't exactly leave much left over for feeding yourself, never mind a child or two. There has also been a marked cultural shift since the advent of the internet. On the whole, people are becoming more individualistic, prioritizing personal fulfillment, careers, travel, and hobbies over milestones that were traditionally held in high esteem, like marriage and parenthood. It's not exactly a surprise why this is happening. We are bombarded every waking minute with more adverts than ever before.
Free money! Hey, come and get your free money at Country Boy Waterbands! One-year financing on any waterband is now free!
Beautiful holidays, clothes, cars, jewelry, watches, homeware, shorts, and Instagram posts for materialistic goods that are just out of reach. Contrary to the West, Japan has traditionally been a collectivist society. That means that people think of themselves as part of a group of like-minded people working towards a common goal, and often forego personal fulfillment in favor of the common good. But the new generation of youth in Japan has rejected collectivism in favor of a more American and European-like individualistic mentality. This shift...
I think for him, probably not with bad intention, but to classify the entirety of Europe as having been individualistic, I think this is also, some of the countries are having it come about over time. I imagine Italy, for example, was a much more collective country than it is today. I remember I watched the stream of Asmongold, and he was asked, like, well, how do you describe the US, or some question like that, and he was like, his answer was extreme individualism. And I live now in the US, and I can see there's a mix there. There's extreme individualism, but some form of unity to the country, but that's in itself breaking down as well. There's so much divisiveness. I wonder, I wasn't here, but I can imagine that the US was more in unity 30, 40 years ago. And now it also has something to do with how good you're doing. If you're doing well, everyone around you is doing well, the overall atmosphere becomes one of joyfulness, where we can be together. It's like a togetherness. We're all doing well, we're all thriving. Of course, we're going to have better attitudes towards each other. But if we're all having a bad time and it's all difficult and we can only care for ourselves and I can't care for you, not only is it not natural, it's not what we naturally want to do. We want to help each other. And if we feel like we can't, we feel like we're useless, we feel like we don't have purpose, it's really a lot of things in one. It's a major mental game. But individualism in itself is not a good thing to this degree, in my opinion. You must have some accountability or feel accountability to your neighbor, your nearest, even if it's a small circle. And you must have the monetary policy must be good enough to allow you to do that. What do you think?
Shift has been so strong that there's a colloquial name for such people, parasite singles, referring to people who live with their parents into their late 20s and 30s to maintain a carefree lifestyle.
Look, some of them are going to be literal parasites, but at the same time, this is just an effect of all the current situations. Whoa, hold on. I need to cancel my vacuum cleaner robot.
An astonishing 70% of unmarried Japanese men and 60% of unmarried women aged 18 to 34 are not in a relationship. This has obviously come as a big shock to Japanese society, but things aren't much better in the West. This might surprise you, mostly because we live in a very sexualized society, but people are having less sex than ever before. One study found that between 2009 and 2018, the proportion of adolescents reporting a sexless lifestyle rose from 29% to 44% amongst young men, and from 49% to 74% amongst young women. The researchers say that the temptations of social media and video games are partially to blame.
I'm so happy I'm married. I can't imagine growing up today with this issue. What the hell?
Maybe we are simply finding our pleasure elsewhere. But there's also the proliferation of what I'd describe as no-sex cults, such as the 4B movement, that sees women swear off relationships, men, sex, and childbirth for life. It began in South Korea a few years ago and has now spread like a virus across the West. But perhaps the bigger reason...
I don't know enough about that movement, so if anyone knows anything, please share it, because they might have legitimate reasons to go this far, but overall, the end result is obviously a terrible one, of women not wanting to have kids, which is just not... That's terrible.
...is that people are also dating less. Despite it being easier than ever before to download one of the many apps and sort your entire city into neat little piles of leftward or rightward swipes of approval, the success rate of these apps is lower than ever before, if one defines success by the percentage of users who go on to form long-term relationships. They make money from ads and subscription models. Therefore, the longer that users spend on the app, the more money they make. They are actually designed to dangle a carrot of endless hot flirtatious singles that are not what your mother would describe as marriage material. Countless companies over the years have tried to neatly pack love and or lust into an algorithm. And maybe, just maybe, that was a really bad idea. In doing so, we have removed the quintessence of what makes lovers fall in love.
44%.
That being the spontaneous, imperfect beauty of the human condition.
It's also the problem of choice, right? If you're constantly shown that there are 1,000 people, you know, that you could swipe on or whatever, choice is a problem.
Japan's population has been declining since 2010 and is projected to drop from 125 million today to 75 million by 2100. And this leads me neatly onto the aging elephant in the room. Should we really be concerned about shrinking populations, or is it perhaps a better outcome for the future of the planet? Well, this is the narrative that has been so pervasive over the past 50 or so years. As population numbers started to grow exponentially, statisticians, scientists, climate alarmists, and everyone in between immediately lost their collective shit, as they thought that within a couple of decades, overpopulation would lead to mass disease, starvation, and general bad times. In 1968, a senior researcher at Stanford University, Paul R. Ehrlich, released the now infamous book, The Population Bomb. It was all very alarmist and warned of upcoming worldwide famines and the depletion of all resources if we don't immediately put the brakes on and enact measures to stem population growth. Then, in 1979, China jumped on the bandwagon and enacted its one-child policy, which it has only just retired in 2016 because their earlier fears were unfounded, and they realized that more workers equals more economic output. And that's been the general trend. All the doomsday scenarios that the experts predicted would come just haven't materialized. Bear in mind that most of these mass famines, etc., were forecasted to happen well before our current numbers. The population bomb said the optimal global population was just 1 billion. And more recent studies have suggested that the Earth can only support up to 7 billion people, yet here we are at 8 billion and climbing. The world has its wars and its woes, But there has yet to be a global famine or a total depletion of minerals, fuel, or anything else meaningful for that matter.
I'm so happy you commented about that, because I also think it's full of shit.
Because something that all the alarmists didn't account for is the technological ingenuity and progress of the human race. We're not perfect, and there are starving, diseased people in the world.
And that's
But
fine.
we have generally found a way to overcome the issues of overpopulation by endlessly inventing and improving old methods. Over the past 50 years, farming, mining, refining, and transport, as well as many others, have all improved in myriad ways to keep pace, more or less, with the population proliferation. And now, with birth rates hitting the floor, countries like Japan and South Korea have fired the early warning shots for the future of all planet Earth. Our population is still increasing, but it won't be for long. Current models estimate that it will peak at just over 10 billion people in 2086, before it starts to decline. And if birth rates don't improve before then, the decline will be rapid and a hell of a lot more destructive than overpopulation ever was. Today, pretty much all of the developed world lives in a capitalist society. And capitalism only functions in its current form if it's constantly growing. That means we need more people to buy more things all of the time, or our economies will shrink. Whether that's a good or bad thing is still up for debate, and the harsh reality is that it's the best system we have right now. But what will happen to a capitalist world when people start dying faster than they are being born?
The death part should be putting the weight and not the other.
We don't yet know the answer to that, but keep an eye on countries like Japan and South Korea. Once upon a time, the economic miracles of the East, and we will soon find out what the future holds for the rest of the world. Japan was once the second richest country in the world. Today, it's still just about holding on to number 4 on the list, but that certainly won't continue to be the case as its working population starts to completely disappear over the next few decades. If you don't already have children, whether you decide to have them or not is ultimately a personal choice, and there's no doubt about it. If you're in your 20s or 30s, it's probably harder to raise a family today than ever before since the end of the Second World War. But as we continue to head at full speed into a brave new world of AI, tech, endless engagement, and constant choice, perhaps it's important that we don't erode the cultural and spiritual pillars laid down by our ancestors and forgo the core values of humanity that make us human. Because when all is said and done, what could be more human than giving life to another human?
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Thanks for watching.
Thank you.
Just a quick word to say that I couldn't make these videos without the support of my Patreon members. Consider joining the exclusive 42 Discord community by supporting me on Patreon. It's a great place to discuss my videos with like-minded individuals and myself. The link's in the description, but if you don't want to, or you can't join my Patreon, then please don't worry. A simple like or comment to say thanks would also put a huge smile on my face.
Heck yeah.
Thank you.
That was a beautiful video. Very well done. He really went over. I don't know anything he skipped. Let's see the comments. How can we convince people to have more kids while simultaneously doing nothing about the reasons they're not having kids? That's exactly. You just sum up the whole solution here. No one's doing anything or solution. That's the problem, right? You want people to have kids and you're doing nothing about the reasons why they don't want it. Here as well. My father owned a home, 2 cars, land that could sustain my family on 1 income at my age. I earn more than he did. I can't buy a house. I've never owned a brand new car. Job security is ass, even with a great job. My generation won't be able to retire and I'm doing better than most. Why would I bring a kid to a worse childhood than I had? I don't know if we're overly pessimistic sometimes in the fact that a lot of us can have kids still. It'll be difficult, but in some cases you could, I guess. I mean, that's why people are still having kids to some degree, right? I just wonder if we're all a bit too pessimistic about everything, or if it's incredibly genuine to be this worried. I definitely feel that there's a major issue regarding this, as it shows already in the statistics. And obviously the solutions now would be better than later, right? But should we try anyways? I don't know. What? Yeah. They got on the housing ladder, pulled up the ladder, destroyed all the ladders, set fire to the ladder factory, and said, back in our day, we were better at jumping. I'm facing a pressing expense, replacing my worn-out eyeglasses, which are nearly 2 years old and in dire need of replacement. This got me thinking, how can someone be expected to support a child when it's already a struggle to meet one's own basic needs? Yeah, I wonder which countries they're all from. It might be the US, I don't know. Watching your parents struggle is probably enough to make someone say they don't want children. I guess, I don't know. It kind of makes sense. It's simple. Working at a gas station 40 years ago made enough money to support a family. This was my point as well. You should be able to have a regular job that provides to the community, doing regular things, as long as you're not, just average competence, and be able to have even just a small family. And small family, I mean 2 kids and a wife. Now it's not even enough to keep you fed until the next paycheck, let alone other people. Exactly. I think we're constantly, a lot of people in the US are like 1 paycheck away from homelessness. And then you're asking them, oh, we need to have enough kids. I'm like, you're joking, right? There's a saying in my country, you don't inherit, you don't live. That's pretty much sums up the living cost situation these days. Do I want a wife? Yes. Kids? Yes. Do I deal with depression anytime I realize or remember I'm single? With no experience, my youth is gone. There's next to no chance of having a family of my own. Sadly, also yes, but I'm barely keeping my head above water. Supporting a family is an impossible dream. You should get better help. Or best help. Well, that's the point about the mental health issue, right? Which, for some reason, the West also has much more of a focus on. It might just be the development itself. I mean, because a lot of countries that aren't so developed just don't think of mental health to that degree. But the more developed you get, the more, or many countries might also just be hiding it in some sense, like a cultural thing. Like you don't really talk about it, you just move forward. The wolves are upset that the sheep won't reproduce. They created too many wolves, and so the sheep don't see a reason to. They can't get out of it. I can't even afford a new pair of eyeglasses. What's up with the eyeglasses, man? You guys, if you're in the US, just fly to Mexico if you can. Get some eyeglasses there. Or drive there. Well, it's a simplistic answer, I know nothing about where they are. What are governments surprised about? Salaries haven't competed with the cost of living for decades. I would love to have a family house, but at this rate, I couldn't support it. It just doesn't end, huh? Oh, look at this guy. I'm 40, have a PhD, tens of published scientific papers, and this year had to give up a small apartment I rented because I can no longer afford it. Having a house, wife, and children is beyond imaginable to me. Get a plumbing license. Yeah. It's probably not wrong. The simple answer is because they took my hope for a better future. If I don't believe that I can get better, why the hell would I get a child and force it to experience worse than this? I think a lot of it has, all the things mentioned in this video end up producing a sense of hopelessness. That's really what it ends up doing. And that hopelessness is incredibly difficult to cure. Yeah, so and that's the issue. A lot of the developed world, I actually didn't know it was that bad. I wouldn't have wondered it was that bad around the world. I've seen the map, but it really just makes you question, like, wow, there's more, I don't know what the percentage is, but it's more than 50% of the entire world is having an issue. That is an international crisis. Don't have less kids, have more kids. But it's not even that simple, because it's not like we don't want to have more kids. It's that it's too difficult, or we believe it is. Anyways, I'm going to share this video down. this was a great video. I really like this guy. Let's give him a subscribe. Thoughty2, what a name. What do you guys think? Do you have kids? Do you not have kids? Do you want kids, but you don't feel like it's possible? Where do you live? What's the situation? What's the deal here? How do we get out of it? Thanks for watching. Have a nice day.